So let's talk about why we're here. Let's talk about EDDMapS. How we got here, what led to the development of EDDMapS, and the different ways that you can integrate it into your program. So first of all, I'm Chuck Bargeron. I'm the director of the University of Georgia's Center for Invasive Species and Ecosystem Health, or BUGWIT. And what we do at the center is really all about partnerships and information technology, building tools to put out on the ground for people to use to help solve problems. And most of those tools end up using some sort of information technology component. We also have to research better ways of doing that and then actually put on the trainings like we're doing today. The center was founded started in the mid-90s, and one of the original projects of the center was the Cooperative Agricultural Pest Survey Program. We were very involved in that for Georgia and entering the data, collecting the data, working with different partners to bring together this data on primarily agricultural pests and then share it with this national database. Sound familiar? The other thing that the center did was collect and scan 35mm slides from labs and universities all across the country. And so we took those slides, database those slides, ended up releasing multiple photo CD products of those slides to share so people could start integrating them into PowerPoint presentations. When the collection grew too large, we ended up launching the Forestry Images website as the place to go get those pictures and get the information about them. And that was launched in 2001. We had about 3,500 images as part of that collection, which includes things beyond forestry as well. And now we have over 300,000 images as part of that collection. Another one of the outlets into that collection and added on to that collection is the invasive.org website. And so invasive.org is our hub for everything invasive species, including pictures and information tied to those. And here's what invasive.org looks like today. One of the things we were working in the forest health arena, and one of the things that in this time frame in the early 2000s started coming about was the idea of invasive plants as being part of forest health. And so as everyone or most everyone should know, the executive order was signed in 1999, really focused, and brought a federal focus on invasive species. And out from that, things came like the work Jim Miller was doing in Auburn, Alabama on invasive plants in southern forest. And so we worked with Jim and others that in this area to develop again, a CD-ROM and then later a DVD-ROM of invasive plants of the eastern United States and then later invasive plants of the United States. And we pulled together pictures, information about these invasive plants and had that all in one product, and then also had that available on the invasive.org website. But one of the things we kept noticing was the lack of good distribution maps. And we said, okay, what can we do about this? How can we improve these maps? How can we get better information and really fill in these gaps? So while we were doing this at BUGWIT, in other places in the US, there were other things going on that would help us eventually get to where we are with EDDMapS. The first National Early Detection and Rapid Response Workshop was held in June of 2000 in Fort Collins. And the purpose of this workshop was to really get together what a national early warning and response system would look like, what those elements needed to be, and then what you would need to do to continue the development of that system. And I was able to find some old pictures from that workshop. And interestingly enough, our keynote speakers for today and tomorrow, Mike Illamini and Steve Manning, were both in attendance to this workshop. And some other faces that are really important to this story, Les Merhoff, Jill Swearingen, and Rita Beard, were also at that workshop, along with many others. But I'm going to pull out some ways that some of these individuals really helped get us to where we're at. And it's interesting that a lot of that goes back to this workshop that was held in 2000. And one of the products that came out of that workshop was this diagram here. And this diagram really focuses on what the different pieces that are needed to do early detection and rapid response correctly. And so you have that detection, you have that way that people report something, and then what happens after it's reported. And as we've gone through and continue to build and improve EDDMapS, we've really focused on what, this concept is kind of being key to what the process looks like. Shortly after that workshop, Les Merhoff, who was the herbarium curator at University of Connecticut, decided he needed a way to get out in the field more and to really get to train people about how to identify plants, how to collect plant information, and how to really do what he loved. And so as part of that, they submitted a grant proposal and were funded through USDA, CSRES, now NEFA, to develop the Invasive Plant Atlas of New England. And this really became the first place where you could see distribution maps of invasive species and do reports of invasive species online. And this became the model for what a lot of others have done, including us at EDDMapS since then. Another thing that was happening around this same time is Rita Beard, originally with the Forest Service and then later with the Park Service, worked very closely with the North American Weed Management Association, which is now NASMA, to develop the North American Invasive Plant Mapping Standards. And those standards form the basis of the database that runs EDDMapS and many other invasive species databases across the country. And so these standards that came out of that meeting and the needs that were addressed at that meeting and the people that were at that meeting really helped form the basis for where we're at today. As you got into the later 2000s, the iPhone was released, and this really gave us that tool with a camera and a GPS unit. And the camera continues to improve to take pictures out in the field and record this information. And a group at UCLA really jumped to the forefront of that on invasive species with a project called What's Invasive. And Eric Graham was one of the leads of that project. And he really saw things that, smartphones can make it a lot easier to collect this information. And so What's Invasive became one of the early apps that allowed you to collect information on invasive species and report them to a central database and website. And so we later ended up working with What's Invasive and iPaint to incorporate that data into EDDMapS and ultimately consume those projects into EDDMapS. Another attendee at that original workshop, Randy Westbrooks, who was with USDA APHIS and then later USGS, spent most of the 2000s going around the country and into Canada really talking about this concept of early detection and rapid response, how important it was to do something early and helping to form different invasive species organizations at the state and province level. And so I think Randy was not in those pictures because I think he was actually the one that took some of those pictures. But Randy, if you never met him, he's a great character and really passionate about early detection and rapid response and why it's so important. Another group that was really one of the forefront of invasive species and early detection rapid response is the Everglades Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area. And that group, because of the uniqueness of the environment and the uniqueness of the problems they have there, has really been one of the leaders to the point that they were recognized by the Secretary of Interior and received an award because of the work that's been done there. And we've worked very closely with them, and we'll get into that later in terms of building the I've Got One app. So back at Bugwood, while all this was going on, we were looking at ways to think about what was going on in different parts of the country with eye pain and some of these other things, and trying to figure out a way to bring that together to really solve both this electronic reporting issue as well as the distribution mapping issue. And so the first thing we did was we said, okay, let's look at Tift County. There's 4 major highways going through Tift County. What if we just did a demo and we said, okay, let's map things, put those points on a map, have photos of the locations, and be able to have this interactive map of where the invasive plants are in Tift County. And so we started thinking about how that would work and what you would need for that to do and how it would work as a web application. And around that same time, we had hired Chris Evans to come on as our invasive species coordinator. And Chris had just finished a master's at Iowa State. And part of what he did for his master's is using volunteers as well as experts to survey for invasive plants. And so he had a lot of experience with working with volunteers and professionals to pull data together and think about how you needed to train volunteers to identify different species. And Chris is actually going to speak tomorrow about some of the training he has done in his current position in Southern Illinois. Another thing that happened about the same time that really opened up a lot of doors for us was both Google and Yahoo released an API to allow data to be overlaid on top of their Google Maps interface or Yahoo Maps interface. And so for the first time, you could map and show data on a platform that everybody was familiar with and everybody was using to get directions. And so it no longer required you to use a GIS software in order to visualize data. So we said, okay, let's build a way to pull all of this data into one place, aggregate the data, simplify early detection reporting through web forms, and really make it where when you go out in the field and you collect data, it can go to one central place, be stored there, not going to go anywhere. We knew what long-term maintenance of a database project looked like because we were doing it with the image database. And so we built this tool to be able to do that. And so no longer was data just captured on these little cards like this old Python record we found, but it was also collected electronically and saved and shared electronically. So going back to the Python and the Everglades CISMA, another thing we did early in around 2010 was we said, okay, now it's time to really look at better ways to focus on reporting for the public. And so we had a meeting with the Everglades CISMA, and folks from a bunch of different organizations were there as shown here. And we figured out ways to share data between the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission and EDDMapS on invasive animals. The decision was made to take the 188 number, I've got one number, and make it statewide, going from something that has started in the Keys. We decided to register the IveGotOne.org website and make that the portal into EDDMapS for Florida, and then build a smartphone app focused on reporting invasives in Florida and making it easy to report things like pythons to the appropriate individuals. And so about a year and a half later, we launched the I've Got One app. Funding for that was provided by the National Park Service, Everglades, and Big Cypress National Parks. And since then, that app has been downloaded 57,000 times, and we've had over 6,000 reports into that app. And most of those are from the general public trying to help. And those reports come in because of the advertising and the promotional activities that are done around the I've Got One, whether it's billboard, bumper stickers, news articles. There's a lot of information that all ties back to that telephone number, website, and smartphone app. And so we went from the Everglades, and our next project with EDDMapS was in Alaska. And what we did in Alaska, working with the Forest Service and the University and Heritage Program there, is to take their database and visualize it on a map. And this really pushed the limits of what the Google Maps API could do. We were mapping both positive and negative data, and there was, I think, about 80,000 records at the time that we were trying to display on a map and make interactive and make load fast on these different species. And so it really enhanced through this project what we were able to do with the mapping interface. From there, we started working with the Missouri River Watershed Coalition and the Center for Invasive Plant Management at Montana State at the time to expand and have EDDMapS reporting for those states, which eventually became all Western states and EDDMapS West. Then Jill Swearingen, one of the attendees to that initial workshop, said, hey, let's do this for the Mid-Atlantic region of the US. And so with some funds from the National Park Service, we were able to expand into the mid-Atlantic parts of the United States. And the pieces started coming together. We started looking at these regional networks and ways we could do things better and share data and figure out, these different projects. And more partners came on board. We had some projects with Fish and Wildlife Service, with Army Corps of Engineers, APHIS, and through some state departments of ag, some NEFA funding, as well as some nonprofits and private groups. And we started to expand into Alberta and Ontario around this time as well. And then we said, okay, let's look at this from a national US level. How can we, not do things so fragmented? And so we worked with the US Forest Service, Forest Health Protection, to look at a way to fund EDDMapS. So the core part of EDDMapS, the data collection and aggregation and some general functionality at the national level, and then still be supported with projects at the state and regional level as well. So we started working with the Forest Service, then providing some annual support for EDDMapS to really get it where it's at today. And I really thank them for that. And so as EDDMapS continued to grow, then more and more people started looking at it and going, well, what else can we do with this? And so we worked with Utah Weed Supervisor Association, Utah Department of Ag, and Montana Department of Ag to really build the product that you're going to hear about later from a couple of the folks that helped us came up with it, EDDMapS Pro. And EDDMapS Pro, the goal of it is to really change the story of the data. So you're not just showing points on the map, you're showing the action on the ground. You're showing when things change from treated to eradicated. You're showing when species are not found. You're changing the story around the map to really build things up and better sell the product. And that's better sell the work you're doing. And that's what some of the decision making and funding panel tomorrow is going to look at even deeper. We worked with the Invasive Plant Control Incorporated to build a system to track treatments and hours and methods and chemicals. And so we built that for them, and then we're able to take that and work with Minnesota Department of Agriculture and University of Wisconsin to expand that to a tool that they could use that would sit on top of EDDMapS and allow them to do a lot more tracking than you can do with the standard EDDMapS package. We started working, and you're going to hear more about this afternoon, in the more traditional agriculture arena. And we launched Ag Pest Monitor last year as a way to track more than just invasive species, but other economically important pests in agriculture. We worked again with the Forest Service, but at the National Forest level, to build a citizen science platform for reporting invasive species, kind of focused at the forest level. So you're mapping invasives in your favorite places. You're mapping invasives in the places that the public lands that you enjoy, with a different audience in mind than the traditional EDDMapS. And so kind of building that EDDMapS Lite system, which we'll talk about a little more this afternoon. And then on the opposite end, taking the data and using that data through models in ArcGIS to be able to target what infestations based on different criteria should be treated first. So to sum up my introduction, this is where we're at today. EDDMapS is this ultimate aggregator. It's working on invasive species, biocontrol, pest data, working across geographic, political, and organizational boundaries. There's tools from everybody to use at a national or international scale down to the CWMA and CISMA local scale. And we're continuing to improve it and continuing to add new tools, some of which you'll hear about today. But we're also focusing on what's important, telling the story, filling in the maps, showing the true distribution. We're merging things into one platform, both for the smartphone apps and the website. So no more regional projects trying to make everything under one EDDMapS brand. And we're getting there with the addition of Canada as part of the core EDDMapS system. And you'll see as the maps have expanded now to include Canada. Continuing with the online reporting through the web interface, or through the different apps, two of which you're going to hear about today, the EDDMapS app and the EDDMapS Pro app. We're continuing to work at a national level to help continue to improve and build this early detection and rapid response framework by having some of these tools that can help along the way. Looking at what kind of data is needed when there's a detection, whose jurisdiction is it in? Is the identification correct? Has a risk assessment been done before? And then what kind of response is available for that new report? And then making sure that all of that data is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, that it can be shared, that it can be downloaded, it can be used in the models we're going to hear about tomorrow. It can be used to tell a story, to sell what work you're doing, and to continue to do that work. And we're trying to build a tool for every job. Maps, we think of EDDMapS as this toolbox, and there's all these different tools that go in that toolbox. And some of them are for different users. We look at the app and the website for more casual users. We look at I've Got One, and the Wild Spotter app is more of the public. And then as we pull data from iNaturalist, another way to get data from the public. And then having the more professional apps with EDDMapS Pro, AgPest Monitor, ISM Track, and then making this data available for researchers to really get, be able to get the data from one place. So to sum up, what I really wanted to start off with is tell y'all that this is not possible without the partnerships and without the work that each of you are doing on the ground. And all we're trying to do with EDDMapS is have a tool to make it easy where you can use early detection and rapid response as a educational tool for the public, and then also help build this rapid response infrastructure. Make it easy for you to show your successes and make those tools available. Because at the end of the day, it's not about mapping. The goal is eradication, and the goal is public awareness. And so anything we can do to help support you in that goal is what we're trying to do with this. And finally, I want to thank, you're going to hear from some of the EDDMapS team today in the next few presentations, but I also want to thank the folks behind the scenes that are doing the programming of the website and the apps and making sure everything works the way that it should. And so I want to thank them. And I want to thank y'all, and I hope you enjoy today and tomorrow. And, I put this picture of my son, and it's there because, we all aren't going to be Superman. We all can't do everything. So let's figure out what we can do and do a good job of it, and come up with something that, makes a difference. And that's what we're really trying to do with EDDMapS. And I think what most of you are trying to do in your individual jobs and careers. So thank y'all.